Well, thank you guys for showing up for our third installment, 3 out of 4 that we're going to have this year on our deep dive into cover crops. My name is Shane Meyer. I am part of the Farmer Advocacy Program through the Nature Conservancy. And along with me on this is Jay and his father, Dave Brandt. They are cover crop gurus, I like to say. I work a lot with them. They get all my questions. And so we're here to help you guys with any questions that you have. Feel free to chime in anytime. If you have a question, unmute yourself. Feel free to type into the comments and I will pose a question for you if you would like, or have a conversation with us. So today we're going to be covering broadleaves and brassicas. I believe we're going to do that in opposite order though, right? We're going to do brassicas first and then broadleaves.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Sounds like we got about 30 slides for you guys. We'll go through it. If you have absolutely any questions, reach out and we'll help you get through that. So right now, if you guys want to leave your video on, feel free. If you want to take your video off as we go to the slideshow, feel free to do that also. And I will turn it over to Dave and Jay. Dave and Jay, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Bet.
Share screen. There it is. Nope.
Are we in the view mode here? Let's get in the PowerPoint. Right.
There we are.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Like Shane mentioned, Jay and David Brandt, you probably know us, and we have the Walnut Seeds business, right? So try to get some more information to everyone about the Brassica species and broadleaves, how we can use them in our cover cropping system, what features and benefits they offer. So we're going to get rolling. Again, we're going to reference this cover crop table that's provided by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. If you did a Google search for cover crop periodic table, you'd come to this. And if you click on any of the squares, it would take you to some more specific definitions. So it's a great resource and tool if you have questions. They have a lot of good detail and information there. So we're going to focus on cool season brassicas and warm and cool season broadleaf plants. So they fit into a broad region. The brassicas generally will grow in the summer very well, but they do like cool weather and will tolerate lots of cold. It takes a good bit of freezing to terminate most of them. Not so much on the broadleaves, a little bit of hint of frost, and many of them are wilting away. So we'll talk about that as we get with each one as well. We're going to start off with probably the diva, right, of cover crops. Everybody wants to plant and show off their big radish. We love radish here. Dad's been working with radish since early 2000s, maybe as early as 1999. Working with, yeah.
Jay, I don't know what anyone else can see, but are you advancing slides? Because we don't see that.
Oh, really? Well,
what do you see, Shane?
We're locked on your slide profile.
We see your first slide, and then we see.
There you go.
All right.
Yep.
Excellent. So we were talking about the radish. The key things that we like about the radish include quick growth, suppression of weeds because of that quick growth, the fact that the radish tuber is a big nutrient storage silo, right? So it scavenges nutrients from that. We can improve soil drainage because of the taproot that reaches through some compacted soils. The growth of the tuber itself also does some natural tillage, lifting and opening up the soil. And the benefit we have here as an ease of management is the fact that they will winter kill when you have several days below freezing.
Yep, and Dr. Rafik Islam's done a lot of studies with our radishes on our fields, and he came up with a figure that I could not hardly believe, but he said that as the radishes go through the hard pan, the taproot will put about 20 or 1,250 pounds of pressure to break through that hard pan. And we've actually seen him go through the hard pan, a pencil size or a little bigger. And then once it broke through the hard pan, the tuber got big again and went probably another 6 or 8 inches deeper in the soil. And then the taproot went on. We have seen it help with some slug problems. You know, they tend to eat the radish when it's starting to freeze, and it has a little toxic effect to those to the slug itself. And we've also seen it as it fumigates the soil. It actually takes the eggs from the slugs and it deteriorates them so they will not, I guess you'd call it hatch, right? You know, because we'll see them whether a slug egg is normally clear. It looks like about the size of the end of a ballpoint pen when we look at them, but then we'll see they'll turn dark, and we see the population go down with the radish in our rotation.
Yep. And that's because the slugs they're drawn to the radish as a food source, and then they'll lay eggs on the radish. And as it dries down, right, decomposes, it dehydrates those eggs, and that's what kills them. So again, just to see the poster picture of the radish, Dad standing there in a field of precision planted radish and peas. Again, so you get a really nice even dispersion across the field. Below him there is the soil tilth that you see below and around the radish, and how the earthworms will congregate in those root hairs of the radish quite a bit. So you'll always see an increase in earthworm population around the radish. The picture on the right was a year that we did 4 different radish trial. So we have jackhammer radish, our nitro radish, and tillage radish, along with a forage radish called the Graza radish. So Graza and the tillage radish are the only 2 genetically identified radish. Most other brand names are just that, brands of either a daikon radish, which is the tall, slender one, or a type of oilseed radish, which is you see in the small tuber on the right, which is part of that forage radish. The Graza radish has a small tube with lots of hairs. So it does a lot of good work in the soil because of that. So you see, again, a lot of the radish are going to be very similar in appearance. They form very similar function. Our experience with most brands is very similar performance. We know some will tend to flower earlier, so you have to be careful of planting them too early in July, that they'll go to seed really quick. So generally we want to say radish does better planted late July, early August, to avoid that bolting that we would see. And there's particular varieties that are more prone to that than others.
The radish
And
that I'm holding actually is within a 15-inch row or a 30-inch row. It's a white planter that has 8 30-inch row boxes with 7 intermingled boxes in between, which makes we can plant 15-inch rows of soybeans. What we do, we put radishes in the corn planter boxes with a sugar beet plate. And we actually space each individual seeds about 3.5 or 4 inches apart, which means we use about 3/4 to a pound per acre of radish seeds. And then at the same setting on the planter with a soybean plate in, a 60-cell soybean plate with our air planter, we can put on about 12 pounds of winter pea. An interesting thing is we watched this and dug the soils between the radish and the peas. We saw the hair roots or the secondary roots coming off the radishes actually going over to the winter pea row and taking nitrogen from those peas, and that's why the tuber got so much bigger. So we had a benefit of both. The nitrogen fixing legume fixed more nitrogen, and the radish got deeper and bigger in our soils.
Go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to ask, is this a question that we should be asking about the radish when we ask when we're looking to do radishes? Should we be asking about the variety of radish that we're getting, its planting date, if it's an early maturing radish, or is that just good for knowledge, but as long as we stay in August, September planted at time, it shouldn't matter?
Yeah, I think, like say, it sometimes won't matter from that standpoint.
Right,
The
because it's
more-
late enough.
Yeah, when it's later like that, it doesn't impact you very much. It's only if you're going to get early after wheat that you need to be careful with those that might have more of a tendency to bolt, right? So that's what you got to watch for. And in spring planted is when they generally plant for seed, because they will bolt really quick in the spring.
And anything, the reason why we're so concerned about them bolting is if they tend to bolt and make a seed head, they tend not to have a very big tuber. You know, if they're bolting and making seed, the tuber will probably be as big as your thumb. And if we can keep that from happening, it'll be a couple inches across. And, you know, I've even seen them 5 inches across. If you really got a place where maybe you've dropped some fertilizer, or maybe there was a manure pie or something there that it grew in, then they can really get big in some cases but they are a great scavenger of what's left from a corn crop or a wheat crop or a bean crop if you get them in early enough.
So I've heard a little bit of information out there of some universities trying to decide whether there is a nitrogen credit released back from these radishes as they scavenge nitrogen. And I'm starting to see some reports saying that there is no evidence that they're actually distributing the nitrogen after they die. Do you have anything to say to that?
So
Another slide show.
yeah, we'll have some more information on that. But again, because they do give off some odor, and just like when they talk about if you can smell manure, you know you're losing some nutrient content. The same is going to apply here. We'll lose some, and because they do decompose so quickly in the spring, they are what you would call kind of leaky. And that's why for a total winter kill system, you know you're sacrificing some carryover because you don't have new roots growing and holding on to that nutrient. So, but again, I think it's very true. It's not a nitrogen source like a legume, and it puts it more into the bank account for drawing against your organic matter rather than the early nutrient release like we would see from green crop. Okay. Again, just some more pictures of the radish. We talked about how you see the gentleman with the penetrometer there, checking next to the radish and in the middle of the road to see the difference in how ease you get in relieving that compaction. The center picture with the small tubers on the shovel, I mean, we think even that size is going to give you great benefit because you get those hair taproots that go down and help improve the soil drainage. You can see on the large tuber, the small pencil-sized taproot that's going to go down 36 to 48 inches into your soil profile. These radish in general, especially the daikon radish type, are always going to grow up out of the soil. It's just a feature of the plant itself. We used to believe that if the soils were loose, it would probably stay level with the surface of the soil. Generally, we don't all have very mellow soils, so there is some back pressure on growth, but it's also a natural habit of the daikon as well. You can see the January picture in the bottom right corner of the snow cover terminating those radish, and then the spring picture on the left-hand side where we're just having that carcass remaining. So very little problems or difficulty in management of the residue from radish. The other nice thing is that it doesn't interfere with being that it doesn't interfere with planting, is that you could target a type of biological strip till with these, as we talked, using your 15-inch or splitter planter to try to come back and plant on top of those radish rows and get the benefit of the fertility in the next slides that we're going to show you. So this slide demonstrates the weed suppression of the radish. So here a farmer planted a monoculture of radish back by the tree line, and to empty out the drill, drove across the field and left this path. So what you see green growing there is just your winter annuals, the henbit and chickweed that came back that didn't get suffocated out in the fall from the residue of the radish. So that's the benefit of those radish leaves, shading that soil and inhibiting those winter annual weeds. That's one of the great champions of radish that we've seen several times.
And so what rate do you think that was planted at?
Probably about 3 to 5 pounds in that range, which is very high,
Yes.
but would have been in the early days of radish a very typical application. And if it was late planted, say in late September, early October, definitely you need as many plants out there as possible, because it's just not going to have a lot of energy because of the coolness and the lack of sunlight to get big, like you get after wheat. You know, you get that heat of August and September to really make some big plants. And this picture kind of shows the difference between, on the left, the daikon type radish, and on the right, your oilseed type radish. So you can see the larger leaf area on the oilseed radish and the smaller leaf area on the daikon type, because again, that's kind of the function of those different plants. In the center is a mustard plant, which has more of a branched fibrous root system, which is intended as a cover crop. Again, we'll get into that for some other benefits and features. So here we talk about recycling of nutrients by the oilseed radish. And again, this is a study that we worked with Rafiq.
Dr. Rafiq Islam,
Yeah.
yes. And this was a study done for 5 years. We usually had about 3 or 4 fields a year. So it's a combination or accumulation of a 5-year study of 20 different fields. And we would always call Dr. Rafiq, and he would come out about 2 to 4 days before we start planting corn, pull samples, and then about 2 or 3 days after we were done or start planting, he would let us know how much nitrogen and phosphorus and potash we had in benefit of above what the soil sample said in the fall before we planted the radish. So here he's saying we can accumulate in the between the peas and the radish, we can find about 250 pounds of nitrogen for next year's crop, but probably only about 75 or 80% of that would be available to the next crop. And phosphorus is about to set 23 pounds of phosphorus, about 230 pounds of potash, 60 pounds of sulfur, because the sulfur tends, when it decomposes, it releases a sulfur odor. So we are seeing some sulfur from somewhere. It has to be below the plow pan, and these plants pull it up and put it in the tuber for, like Jay said, for the storage tanks. And about 150 pounds of calcium, which probably equals about a half a ton of lime being spread every year, and a little bit of magnesium, you know. So we're seeing lots of elements coming up. We've been able to reduce our bought nutrients by as much as 80%, where we're having peas and radishes and other cover crops blended with them. This was done by Dr. Ray Wilds. He worked really close with Steve Groff with his tillage radish and ourselves. And Dr. Wilds wanted to know how far he could find a change of phosphorus in the soil from the tuber. So the big red thing you see there, it looks like a stake, is showing the tuber. And then he's showing out about 5 to 6 inches sideways and probably 8 or 9 inches deep in the soil, you know. And it just shows you how far he's found phosphorus from this tuber as it decomposes.
Yep. And again, that just supports the idea of using that precision planted radish as a replacement for pop-up or starter fertilizer in your option, especially in that's an area where you've got that to biological strip till, so a clean area to plant the corn and give a good chance for, especially early planted corn, right? Good emergence and nutrient availability. So our brand of radish that we carry is the Nitro Radish from GS3 Seeds out in Oregon. It's been very consistent supply and quality of product for us. We enjoy that product quite a bit. From the grazing side, we supply the Graza forage radish, again, because it has great regrowth after grazing and can provide a lot of good forage quality, especially not only by itself, but as a companion in mixes. There is another function of radish, and mainly for nematode control. In this case, the particular varieties are bred for a high amount of glucosulfonate. So once generally these radish are incorporated back into the soil to release those sulfur compounds and help reduce nematode populations, because not only do the nematodes, they are non-host, which means they don't provide any food for the nematodes. These glucosulfonates actually act as a kind of soil sterilizer against those nematodes to help reduce that. So if you had a cyst nematode problem, these control radishes are used quite a bit, and they are used rather heavily with the potato industry to control nematodes there.
Right. And we've also seen lots of suppression of the soybean cyst nematode that really works on the soybean plant. It seems like the way the fumigant comes off of that radish as it decomposes really seems to lower the population of the soybean cyst nematode.
Turnips are probably one of the most broadly used cover crop brassicas because it's used for grazing as well as in general cover crop practice. The benefits of the turnip are quick growth, that it has that taproot below the bulb, that we can graze it with cattle and sheep and goats, and it does, again, store nutrients in that bulb as well. Again, I think it comes down to a value as well, because they're such small seeds, you use very little. You know, quarter to a pound per acre can get pretty thick and provide a lot of good coverage in the field. So that always, again, another personal forage option for later in the season.
Yes. And if, you know, it seems like if we put them in our mixes, especially around a border of a field where there may be some trees or something, and you can have them in the first 20 or 30 foot that you plant into the field, it seems like the deer like them really well. They tend to dig them out in the wintertime. They get their bellies full of the tops and the tuber, and they don't seem to do as much damage in a soybean field or a cornfield if we have that perimeter border with the cover crop.
Rapeseed is becoming more widely adopted, mainly because of its winter hardiness. So again, it's another great value, the lower cost option because of the small seeds. So a little goes a long way. It is very quick to germinate and emerge, and because of the large density of leaves, will outcompete weeds for sunlight. Has a strong taproot to help break up soil, plow pan, and gives you a very long open planting window. A very good companion for late seeded cereal rye, as it will do a dormant seeding and emerge in the spring, similar to what you see with cereal rye.
And it works really well as we go past the last of September. That's in Ohio. I think that's when we need to stop and think about not using a tillage radish or a daikon oilseed radish, and then move to rape seeds or canola, because it tends to do well in the cooler soils that will sprout and come when the soils are still in the 40s. And we can get pretty well have green growth throughout the summer or through the winter.
Yep.
So they will not winter kill though,
They will not winter kill, no.
Right.
And in the spring, it'll look like mustard because it has a yellow flower on it. And after it flowers, Sometimes it's a little hard to control because when it flowers, it starts losing its leaves and makes a seed pod. So you don't have a lot of surface to make chemical contact with to eradicate it. But we've never seen it a problem because by July, it's pretty well matured and turned brown and fallen over, you know. So it hasn't been a problem in a corner bean field.
Yeah, and we're using very low rates, like we said, 1/4 to 1/2 pound. Again, so you don't get any interference, even if you do not have a lot of success with chemical termination on that. Cabbage is very related there to the rapeseed. These are primarily forage type brassicas. Again, the same things go here, very quick germination, nice strong taproot. The cabbage will get tall as well. They can overwinter or they can winter kill. A lot depends on the root condition and how big they get from that. So our cabbage that we sell is the Ethiopian cabbage from Pgg Seeds. The unique character we see with this one is that on first frost, you'll get a lot of stem elongation. It'll actually grow 2 or 3 feet taller with a bunch of leaves on it. So that's again why it's an excellent grazing option in what we would say, what do they call that? Where they set aside the area to graze. So it's a really nice place for that. Mustard is more popular in quick turnaround crop scenarios. So guys doing more with vegetable production where you have those short areas because it is very quick to growing. Mustard is known for nematode control as well, primarily because of you incorporate it, as we mentioned before, in those glucosulfonates breakdown and help minimize nematode pressure. All brassicas will readily cross-pollinate and breed with one another. And mustard, being that it's in that 45 or 50-day window to generate seeds, could have some concern for weediness. So we just have to be aware and watch that. So that's why a lot of guys will, as soon as they bloom, they'll turn them under or do some termination practice. Mowing, flail mowing would also work. So we talked about Mighty Mustard is a real popular brand for that biofumigation. They have some very good genetics that are very strong, and they think they're real proud of it based on the price too. So, but again, this gives you a little description, and being that I'm in the chemical industry, I always like the chemical structures that talk about how those glucosulfonates break down into the thiocyanates and nitrites and use those means to help control our diseases in the soil.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
You said something that was very interesting to me that I didn't realize or know about how all brassicas will pollinate each other.
Yep.
Can you expand on that for just a moment?
I will admit I don't know too much about it, but again, that's why there's quite a diverse range of all of these hybrid brassicas, and we mentioned some of the ones we work with, and we'll get into some more at the end. Again, because they have the ease of crossbreeding on that, so they will accept pollen from one another, and you can get some unique species based on that. I don't know much about how easy it is or difficult, but that's what I've been advised from our seed vendors. Kale is primarily used for grazers. Again, kale has all the benefits of every other brassica, fast growth because of its large stature and large leafy nature, suppresses weeds. It is rather pricey because it's not great at seed production. So that's the one issue there. But again, kale is it's just super tiny seed.
And it does, once you get this, as you see the picture there, it pretty well shuts down any kind of weed pressure you'd have in the field because the canopy with those leaves just shut out the sunlight. And, you know, some of those plants could be 3 or 4 inches apart and still have lots of leaf surface to keep the annual weeds down over the winter.
And we see this with, we'll use kale in grazing mixes along with some of the other brassicas. And we have to really have reduced rates because they will overpower almost every other plant in a high fertility area in a pasture or a feedlot. So
Yeah.
that's with care on those.
What does the root structure to that plant look like?
It'll be that branched taproot
Yeah.
scenario. Yep.
Or they're not fibrous. It's like a fibrous root, but they're bigger in diameter. So they're not as fine as a buckwheat root or a clover root, you
Yeah.
know.
It'd be similar to soybeans, but
Yes.
larger. About double the size of a soybean root branched like that.
And this winter kills also?
Kale, not so easily.
easily,
No. Nope. Just think of kale in your garden. That'll survive a lot of cold. And so here, that's again another advantage for grazers, right? Because you have this extended grazing potential for the set aside there. It gives them a lot of options. So we talked about hybrid brassicas, and so they've developed a lot of these. Our hybrid brassicas come from a breeding program out of New Zealand. This Hunter brand is a combination of a Chinese cabbage and rapeseed. So it's very leafy, and they use it, goes quite well. It survives, like I said, takes the heat of the summer well and provides a lot of good growth and forage. The Winfred is a turnip kale cross, and it gets super large. We've had plants and mixes here get 5 or 6 feet tall and about that big around if they have space to move out. So you can put on a lot of tonnage with the leaves on here. Both of these hybrid brassicas, they are a little bit bitter for the animals, so they do have to get used to eating them. After frost, though, that bitterness goes away and they become sweet. So cattle really like them after a light frost before they get too broken down. Again, just a comparison, if we look at the hybrid brassicas on the left, the radish in the center and a turnip on the right, just the difference in root structure and the top growth that we like to see. Next, we'll get into our broadleaf family. Again, this is a short group. We mainly focus on what broadleaves are well adapted here in Ohio. Our star of the show here is the sunflowers. We have quite a few stories about that. And the picture here is typical of the type of sunflower we recommend in cover crop, which is a peridovic type or open pollinated black oil seed one with multiple heads. So that gives it's nice in field edges and for pollinator strips as well. It's preferred by dove and butterflies.
And preferred by people driving by that wants to take pictures. We found that it does have a pretty deep taproot. You know, if the plants are 4 to 5 foot tall, we'll find a taproot or, you know, a root as big as your thumb, probably 3 to 3.5 foot deep, and then a little finer taproot from that on down. We see a lot of beneficial insects come from it. And if you have these on rented acres, the landlords really like them because they're attractive and people stop and think they're really doing great things, you know, and they are doing great things.
They are. So sunflowers are used for soil remediation because they're a hyper accumulator of heavy metals. In our soils, we have noticed an increase in some of these like zinc,
Yes.
specifically. We can't necessarily attribute it to other ones which we'd like to, like manganese, you know, so, or magnesium, but we do see increases in zinc levels following sunflowers. And we believe that leads to more vibrancy and vitality in the following crop, which in our case is generally corn, because the sunflowers will be in a big mix after wheat. Buckwheat is also a well-known cover crop. Again, great for short and narrow windows between crops. Buckwheat as a small seed will grow quickly, say and bloom in 30 days and set seed in 40 to 45 days. We haven't in a conventional program seen any problem with reseeding and actually encourage it in the spring because again, you bring in some beneficial insects. We like the weed suppression that it has, very fibrous root system, acidic root exudates that make phosphorus more available to the next crop.
And usually we can figure on about 12 to 20 pounds organic phosphorus from using buckwheat in our mixes or using buckwheat by itself. Probably the biggest disadvantage to the buckwheat is if you're organic, it tends to become a weed because it blooms about all summer long, you know, because it makes seed.
It's indeterminate.
It's an indeterminate plant, so it makes seed all the time, you know. It's fun to harvest because you're harvesting green and the seeds are dry. As it comes out of the back of the combine, it looks like you could almost eat it as a salad, you know.
Yep. But no, buckwheat is real popular. It's a very good companion in mixes for all these reasons of beneficial insects, for making phosphorus and hopefully other elements very available for the next crop.
And if we talk, you know, if we talk about the root structure of the buckwheat, we see it in the top 3 to 4 inches, really fibrous. So if you're having surface compaction or crusting from rainfall events, a seeding of buckwheat will almost eliminate that problem, even though you do the tillage, because there's so many fine roots on the surface that it really helps to break up the structure of the soil to allow the raindrop to infiltrate.
Flax is a cover crop that we've recently kind of picked up again as an added beneficial. It's really good in mixes, fine seeded, as we're accustomed to seeing some flax seeds, you know, on breads that we consume. But it does well. It tolerates cool weather very well, and the flowering, which occurs not to about 30 to 40 days as well, yeah. Will draw some insects and support that. It does not have much of a root system from that standpoint, but it will tolerate a little bit of frost from that. But again, we like it because it is a mycorrhizal associator, very strong next to oats, right? So we can build up that mycorrhizal network as we build those associations with flax. So that's, again, the primary reason we use flax is to build the mycorrhizal network and as a companion and support for the other plants.
Correct.
Phacelia is actually a native to North America. Not many people know that. It's grown primarily in the South right now, although seed production mainly went over into East or Western Europe for quite some time, but has recently come back. Phacelia is, again, very small seeded. It is great for pollinators and has a massive fibrous root system, slightly larger than what we see with clovers. So it's great for soil remediation, building up degraded soils, and attracting pollinators. So it does like cooler weather. So if you plant it in July, it's not going to germinate until September. And being fine seeded needs to be, you know, in the top ½ inch of soil, not buried there, or it won't, you know, it's just too deep for the seedling to emerge.
It's as a pollinator, it really makes a lot of great flavored honey. It has a lot of pollen for the bees, so it's a nice thing to have a little bit in your mixes so that it can bloom and bring those pollinators, the bees and other insects that need that nectar and pollen to survive on.
Yeah, and that's the key thing too, because it really provides a feeding period for those parasitic wasps and flies, you know, that go after our detrimental insects.
Yes.
So here we're building in a little bit of that natural insecticide type thing, right? So that's part of your IPN, right? Your pest management system.
So this is a winter kill also, if I'm not mistaken, but it's got to get very cold, below 20 degrees, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
you are correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, just to show all of our favorite broadleaves, the ones that we promote primarily, Phacelia in the upper left, flax next to it on the right, sunflowers, bottom right corner, and buckwheat. So again, all these are great broadleaf species. As you see, they can be planted as a monoculture. And of course, flax obviously is in many areas, buckwheat, sunflowers in many areas. But great companions in all these mixes as well, especially when we look at that planting after small grain.
And the seeding rate's fairly low on all those varieties in a mix, you know.
Very low. Other options that we have for broadleaves would be any kind of flower or forbs that we would use in, say, a native prairie, things like chicory or plantain, herbs, and perennial grasses. It all depends on your objectives and what you're trying to do, and looking at types of set-aside areas or strips, practices of that nature.
We're making your pasture land more productive for these warmer perennial grasses, and some of the herbs are warmer also.
Yep, they carry over well into the summer.
Right.
So here we're talking about the border strips. That has been a real popular thing with NRCS, promoting setting aside, 15 to 30 feet on the edge of fields for pollinator strips. So we can add our forbs and some of these other flowering species in that area as a trap crop and a place for the beneficial insects to get their start and to aid then in whether it be our soybean crop or whatever for pollination. Again, another example, this I believe is over in Europe, of a different type of fence row or a hedge type scenario using these pollinator strips. That's pretty much what we had for brassicas and broadleaves. Just again, there's not a lot of diversity in that scenario from what we feel fits well here in Ohio. There's always other plants that we could consider to use, but we've tried to bring out the features and benefits of these the best we can. So entertain any questions right now.
Let's go back to Phacelia. If at that 20 degrees or below winter kill, does it need to be 18 degrees one day and it's killed, or does it need
It takes
multiple days?
It takes a long period of time, probably 4 to 5 days at 18 or 20 degrees to do that. And usually it happens when we get those 8 to 10 mile-an-hour winds and we get chill factors down to -6 or 8. It seems to take it out, but that's only if it's the only species out there. If we happen to have some other species with that, that actually protects the bottom of the plant, we see the tops being burned off, but then we find that the Brassica will come back in the spring because of the protection of the other species that we have in these mixes. And that's why we like to consider 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 things in, because they actually help each other, protect them over the winter, and they make pretty decent food sources if you need to have some emergency grazing or something like that,
So you definitely
Dave?
shouldn't consider this to be a winter kill. You should
Yeah.
work on a different termination factor.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. We've had a question from one of the viewers. How are you terminating the sunflower?
With frost.
Yes. Winter kill it.
Yeah.
Another question. Is that soil temp or air temperature to winter kill? I'm assuming they are still referring to the Phacelia that we were just talking about.
Yeah, most all of these that will winter kill, it's mostly air temperature from that standpoint. Obviously, once we get a frost layer down into the soil, that's going to speed up that the termination of those plants that are sensitive to the freezing. And like Dad mentioned, around here, normally in our area, we get the cold driving winds that desiccates the plant, as well as the freezing that breaks the cell wall structure. And so those are the two things that we're working on. So they'd be similar, like we say, for oats, radish, and all these winter kill things. 2 or 3 days below 20 degrees will be very successful in termination.
Jay, is the Phacelia still a rather pricey seed?
Yes, upwards of $5 to $7 a pound. Yes.
That's why we use very little of it in a mix, in our mixes. That's why
One factor.
that's one factor, right?
Yeah.
So here's a question I was thinking earlier that I should have asked. Do the radish holes where the tuber is at left in your biostrips disrupt your seeding depth on planting corn?
No. Again, that's a good question. And many people ask that. They're concerned about it being so mellow or that the planter would sink, right? Or that you would be planting too deep or you'd lose the corn seed down the hole. And generally, we have not seen that problem. Usually by the time you're planting corn, that has actually collapsed. Or when you run your double disc opener through there, it will collapse that hole and support the corn seed very well. Again, if you have a concern, obviously you can always run an inch or two to the side if you're precision planting and you've got guidance. We've never had that luxury. And again, we say we get higher yield because our rows aren't really straight. So that's the plan at least.
And really, it's surprising when I did that in '99 with Steve Groff, and we had radishes that was 4 inches apart, but they were actually touching each other because they got 4 inches in diameter. And man, come spring, we had these holes that I think a deer could have fell in some of them. And that's how big they were. But when we put the planter in the field with the fluted coulter in the front, that soil just is so fibrous and so loose that it just collapses in the hole. And we never had a problem with the seed being too deep. The biggest problem is it's so mellow that you have to take some of the tension off the row units because it really wants to push those closing wheels or those gauge wheels on the disc blade down in the ground about an inch or two, So we did have to do some adjustment on our down pressure, both either whether it's hydraulic or spring,
Yeah,
And I'd like to refer you back to that slide that you had, the study of the where it looked like the red stake in the ground and the soil fertility that was around it at that 2-inch depth. If you are worried about it, that is a good visual to show you can plant beside that and still get the benefits of that fertilizer.
Yes.
Off to the side. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Within 2 inches, you're still seeing dark red, 2 inches to the side and 2 inches down right next to it. So you could plant off to the side off a couple inches and still have the same benefit, correct?
Right. You bet. That's right.
To me, it was really surprising to find as many earthworms as we found in the cavity of that radish as it had decomposed and got soft. Well, the first year I had it, I thought, man, the radish is going to be an acid. It's going to, because it smells like natural gas. And I was so worried that we had done something to the soils that nothing would grow in. But then when we started digging and looked at the earthworms, and they were actually in that core of that reddish body, eating whatever they could or whatever it was that they liked, because I think every radish hole had 6 or 8 earthworms in it, and they seem to multiply from there.
Yep.
Got another question. How do you guys terminate the peas after planting the corn in the biostrips? Oh, I'm
The
sorry.
winter will kill them because they get big enough that the winter frost will actually take them. The peas will probably be between knee and waist high going into winter. So it's beyond the growing point is so far out of the ground that it actually kills them. The winter weather will kill them. So the pea and radish with the planter is always brown in the summer or spring when we want to plant.
Another question on the pea. Does it cause much trouble in your mix as far as planting through them?
Generally, no. Again, if you do late planted peas where they would overwinter, because peas have those tendrils and they hold each other together, generally there's no problem with us. Of course, we don't have spiky equipment on our planters. So I would always be concerned about residue managers that have long fingers or closing wheels that are too spiky. again, wrapping on those things. But in general, if you're going with factory type setups, not too much of an issue.
No.
How do you terminate your winter hardy brassicas in the organic system?
So probably once they bloom, you would need to flail mow, would be the best route.
Okay.
Because at that point, they're pretty well have extended most of their energy and won't grow back. But again, so you just have to be careful. One other thing again is the incorporation, right? If it's really dense, you probably would want to mow and then incorporate from that standpoint. So you just have to, like I said, where you're not using herbicide, those brassicas are pretty durable from that, because you can run over them and they'll just grow sideways sometimes. But yeah, flail mowing is probably the best route with those persistent winter hardy brassicas.
Dave, how does the shorter flax do in a mix?
They really seem to handle it pretty well. You know, they won't get but about 12 to 18 inches high. And the leaves are really small. I almost like to call them squirrel ear leaves, you know, compared to other leaves that we see. And it doesn't take much sunlight to keep that plant growing. And we've been real enthused with what we see with a pound or so of flax in our mixes. I mean, they hang in there pretty well till winter comes, you know.
One of the other nice features is that we see the flax will express itself in areas where other plants can't. You know, so if you have a bare spot from some effect in the soil, the flax helps fill in those areas that maybe a small grain didn't emerge well or something else. So it's one of the nicer things, again, about having a mix, right, is that you have these options as the plants express themselves differently.
All right, got a couple of them here. What would you guys consider the perfect mix for grazing cattle on during the summer and late fall, planted after harvesting wheat?
So yeah, we generally promote a combination of warm season grasses and legumes like pearl millet, Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan grass with cowpeas, sun hemp, and then some radish. Sunflowers are also a good companion in there, and they bring, like I said, they're a good nutrient source. So a fairly complex mix like that. And surprisingly, they all do work well in that because they're all very vigorous about growth in the summer. They don't, again, take a lot of moisture because we're generally in the heat of summer, not in a high rainfall time zone. So we get that benefit. We use the legumes to try to help support some of those grasses later in the season. And so that combination gives you some quick emergence, the ability to graze 2 to 3 times on the system as well.
And we always on those, if a guy said he's going to pasture, we lower the reddish rate and increase the
Grasses.
the turnip, because we want that turnip to have that bulb, so that if it does freeze a little bit, the cattle or the sheep can go back out there and they can chew on them bulbs and get some nutrients from them when everything else is turning brown.
Now, let me add a disclaimer to this too. I just want to say that we are speaking from, central Ohio area too. Climate has a big difference on what some of these mixes would be, as this will be posted probably on the internet. What's going to work here in central Ohio isn't going to work in Florida, Georgia, Wisconsin, so on and so forth. So if you have any questions with that, feel free to reach out and we can take your climate into consideration as we put together this quote unquote perfect mix, right? Because it's not going to be perfect for everybody.
That's right. Context. We got to remember context all the time.
Okay. have you ever used any winter Camelina? Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. And no, I don't believe that we've ever looked at Camelina in our mixes here. No.
I'm drawing a blank. I've never heard of that one, so I'm gonna look it up.
They
Yeah,
use it out in the Midwest a lot, you know, out in Nevada, Oklahoma, New Mexico. They'll use a lot of that because it's a really a dry weather plant that takes very little moisture. I do that because I've done some work out there, and when I meet with other seed growers that's selling cover crop seed, they talk about using the things that I've never heard of here, you know, and that's the difference in the climate. That's why we talk about why you need to think about our context is great, but you need to think about the species that's going to work in your area, you know.
Best question. How have you ever done much work with interseeding something in the corn and soybean or sunflowers as far as a companion crop?
We have done some work with it. We do have a grain drill set up to interplant into corn or sunflowers, whatever the case. And we've worked with a couple of farmers doing the same. Again, it has a lot to do with context. Where we are, the corn just seems to shade out way too much for us to get anything beneficial out of an early seeded interplant in corn. We've heard the same thing, especially from some of the guys growing sunflowers a little bit north of us. Sunflowers actually have a bigger canopy maybe than corn even.
Right.
So the shading from those are particularly strict. So generally a lot of guys having success, they say are in that over I-80 or in that at least above I-70 range, or you're going to lower corn population or wider rows.
Right.
So 38 up to 60-inch rows. And generally the benefit there is that you can get some good grazing established for post-corn harvest on that. So and it's mixed again, like say, if you can get a very upright structured corn that's maybe a little shorter statured where you get some sunlight down in there, that would be very beneficial, especially Dave, in the situation with where you're doing cultivation and organic, right? So you don't have any soil armor, and we're looking for some way to really increase that protection against the late summer heat and stabilize the soil in between the rows a little bit without it being weeds or other undesirable plants, should we say.
And I was in Minnesota last week for a couple of days talking to producers, and it's interesting. A lot of guys are doing early cover crop establishment, like at when they're side dressing nitrogen, using an air seeder with urea and cover crops, and they're quite successful. And I get talking to them, and they talk about their corn varieties being 5 to 6 foot tall at max. So I understand why they're having better success. They get a little more sunlight. Most of the guys up through there were using 28 to 30,000, and you know, guys around Fairfield County is using 36 to 40. And it just becomes a jungle that's dark, and it actually sometimes will just the sunlight will be so minimal in there that actually the plant will die. But most generally they just go dormant, and then they'll regreen back up once you harvest, you know.
And we would say that the Brassicas as a species are known to be very successful with the early interseeding. They can establish very quickly and tolerate the shade probably better than any other, especially small grains. Clovers would be the next best selection to be early interseeded from that standpoint, along with the Brassicas. So that's been our experience, yes.
And I would probably add a guess that they're using more of an upright leaf structure on their corn also, instead of a big floppy leaf.
Yep.
So yeah, doing that would be more of a wider row game or a short corn game. Being in 30-inch rows, it would be really hard to establish in interseeded or in a row cover crop. Like you said, going out to 38 just makes a world of difference compared to a 30-inch. And anything greater that you can do from there is even better. I'm not seeing any more pop up. Is there anybody else that wants to unmute, have a couple questions, or can type fast? I'm a very slow typer. I'd rather just talk.
Hey, Dave and Jay, Rick Clark always talks about, even when he's got a few weeds out in his field, he gets a benefit of them because of the way they accumulate nutrients. Do some of these other broadleaves also accumulate some nutrients that will help supplement, what the mix needs?
I don't know that we can state that they are going to do anything like we mentioned with buckwheat, right? And making phosphorus more available from the root exudates. All plants are going to offer some benefit along those lines. So we're still trying to learn if there are targeted species. So, if we're looking for molybdenum or selenium, those are things we're still trying to learn if there are, like buckwheat, that we know does help with phosphorus. So that's a good study for us to look at.
A lot of your macronutrients, let's just take K, for instance, is a rock. If it can be broken down by a plant or an animal and redistributed into the soil, it's going to become available. So as long as we're not harvesting that product and taking it off the soil, if a plant uses it and it biodegrades back into the soil, it is going to become available at that point. Yep. So weed or any crop is going to make that more available. To what level? That's where the research comes in. But you also have to take it at a grain of salt. If you're letting a weed go out there that's going to make 1 million seeds and create more of a weed bank for you, well, then the fact that it just created a little bit more phosphorus or potassium availability for you, but created a much larger problem, isn't exactly what you want to see.
Correct.
It's all balance.
All balance.
Right.
Got another one. It says, sorry, I got disconnected. If someone has already touched on this, have you had any luck with planting radishes with wheat in the fall? What would be the advantages or disadvantages?
We've done that a couple of years with the drill. If we're fly date or maybe a day or two earlier than fly date, up to about 7 days after fly date, we see a 2 to 3 yield bushel increase in our wheat. And I think that's because of the radish that we'll put in will be probably 4 to 5 inches long tuber with another 6 or 7 inches of the taproot. But remember, the diameter of that tuber is only going to be the size of a lead pencil, the wood on a lead pencil. If it's past 10 days past fly date, it doesn't have time enough to develop that tuberous root. So we see no advantage to doing it. So the window of application for radishes or brassicas put with wheat is really short, but it seems to pay if you can get it out there early enough,
That's from others that are doing the work. Again, it's that accumulation of a little bit of phosphorus and some nutrient release in the summer or the following spring that really aids in getting the small grain up and running here as it breaks dormancy primarily.
And just to add a bit of information, you were talking about the fly date. You're talking about the Hessian fly free date, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
And there's information easily found on the internet if you don't know what we're talking about there. If you're watching this at a later date, just for informational fact.
Yep, and generally the seeding rate with wheat is going to be probably around 3 pounds max per acre.
Yeah.
And so you can tolerate that slightly higher seeding rate because again, it's not going to get exceptionally large and outcompete the wheat at that point. So I think that's generally the recommendation we look at in that 2 or 3 pounds per acre range mixed with the wheat.
Well, what if a guy planted his radishes earlier and then came back through and seeded his wheat? Would it damage the radish too much?
It may, because if the radish should be 2 or 3 inches tall, or have 2 or 3 inches of root growth of leaf growth, you're probably going to cut some of those leaves off, and that will help. That will slow the development of that radish.
Yep. So the growing point of the radish is really that top where the leaves attach to the tuber. So if you separate the leaves off right there at the top, that's going to terminate the radish.
Right.
How about manure with some of our brassicas? Will that help get it a good jump start?
Yes, sir. Yes. And the
That's right.
brassicas will actually hold the nutrients from the manure and keep it from leaving the field. Great practice.
Now, again, I know that there is a lot of other single species that we could talk about on these two subjects, but like Jay brought up earlier, these are the ones we're familiar with in our Ohio climate. These are the ones that they tend to deal with the climate for growing reasons in our area. There is other ones that we can talk about if you live in a different climate and have some questions, feel free to reach out on that. But these are what we're familiar with.
Well, again, I think that's, it's great to have all these questions, and we appreciate it asking us to talk about these brassicas and broadleaves. And we're always available to answer any questions anybody has if we've totally confused you. So, well, I thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, I think, Shane, we've got one more talk planned at the end of April. And we're looking to put together information to collect all these ideas together that we've talked about in regards to putting seed mixes together, what's beneficial, how you would use them in different crop rotations, how we would seed those mixes or the plants themselves, and look at some termination practices as well to look at effectiveness and just means of doing that. So that would help us wrap up all the ideas on the differences with the brassicas, how to use them in our cropping systems, and how to manage seeding and termination. That's what we're looking for here in April.
Yeah, that will be April 28th, the fourth Thursday again of the month at 7:30. And we do have it listed on the email that'll go out to be broadleaves, but as you can see, we've covered that and kind of changing our subject of matter for next month. So I put my email in the chat. We will also be sending that out with the email that you got with registration, and a link to this recording if you want to watch it again. You can pose any questions to me. I can get a hold of Dave or Jay with anything more in depth as you want, and we'll go from there. So I personally appreciate you all showing up here tonight. I hope you come with us again next month for our fourth and final for this year. I've seen a lot of good out of this. Hopefully we can continue to go with it year after year if Dave and Jay are willing to do it with us again. So I appreciate y'all being here. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Nope, thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you next month on the 28th at 7:30.